The prairie wind moaned through the cracks of Clara Whitfield's cabin, rattling the shutters like bones in a box. She sat at the small table, a chipped cup of black coffee cooling in her hands, her eyes fixed not on the fire but on the wall where the shadows of flames danced and disappeared. Her days often slipped by like this, unmeasured, unmarked, only the slow crawl of the sun and the ache of silence reminding her that she still lived. She had been alone for so long that solitude itself had become her companion, a weight that pressed as steady as the sky overhead. The people of Ash Bend had seen to that. Once, when she was younger and hope burned stubborn in her chest, she'd walked its dust-choked streets with a ribbon in her hair, expecting someone to notice her, to see her worth. But eyes slid past, and tongues wagged cruel. Odd girl, they called her, spinster material, trouble waiting to happen. A man had once courted her briefly, then vanished after whispers spread about her family's misfortune, her father dying in debt, her mother wasting away from fever. The town branded Clara unlucky, touched by sorrow, a woman to avoid if one wished for a smooth life. And so, one by one, doors closed, and she retreated to the cabin her father built, a mile past the river bend, a place forgotten except by the wind and coyotes. She lived in rhythm with the land now, fetching water from the well, mending fences, coaxing meager harvests from tired soil. Yet in the quiet hours, when the stars pressed down and the coyotes wailed like abandoned children, a yearning rose in her that no prayer could hush, the desire not to be invisible. The wish for one human gaze that saw her and did not turn away. That evening, the sky had been heavy with storm. She felt it before she saw it, the smell of iron in the air, the restless twitch of the cottonwoods. Clara stacked kindling by the hearth, her shotgun leaning within reach, for out here one never knew what the storm might drive to he. The men filed in, bringing the storm with them, the smell of horse, of wet leather, of smoke clinging to their clothes. They filled her cabin until the walls seemed to shrink, until she was pressed against the table, her heart thundering louder than the rain. None spoke at first. They set down their weapons with care, sat where space allowed. One of them, Gray Fox, the one who had knocked, nodded at her, the closest thing to thanks she would get. She moved as if through water, fetching beans, bread, whatever she had. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the pot into the fire. She felt their eyes, heavy as stones, tracking her every movement. Except for the one, the quiet one by the hearth. He knelt to tend the fire without asking, coaxing the flames higher, the glow lighting the planes of his face. He never looked directly at her, yet she felt his presence like a steady hand at her back. When at last the men ate, silence filled the room. Only the storm spoke, thrashing the walls, rattling the shutters. Clara sat apart, clutching her shotgun across her knees, though her arms ached from the weight. Her gaze flicked from face to face, searching for danger, for hunger that was not for food. But she found only weariness, men battered by storm and travel. Still, fear gnawed her insides raw. Alone, a woman among 7 warriors, she was a lamb among wolves. Shame burned hot in her chest for the thought, but she could not banish it. What would Ash Bend say if they saw her now? They would spit her name into the dirt, call her a traitor, a whore. Perhaps they already had. Perhaps even now the gossip of her solitude grew darker with each passing season. She drew her shawl tighter, watching the storm rage through the cracks. The cabin walls groaned, the fire popped. The men's shadows leapt and twisted, giants looming on the boards. The hoofbeats slowed as they reached her cabin, circling like wolves scenting prey. Mud spattered the walls, horses snorting clouds into the rain-thick air. Clara's finger itched on the trigger. Her heart battered against her ribs. Then one rider dismounted, tall as a tree trunk, shoulders broad beneath a soaked hide coat. He stepped forward into the glow of her window. His face was hard, weather-carved, his dark eyes steady. The knock on the door was not frantic, not violent. Just one, then silence. She stood unmoving, the fire crackling behind her, the storm hammering the roof above. Another knock, softer this time, as though whoever stood there knew how easily terror frays a woman's will. Clara lifted the bar and cracked the door, the shotgun leveled. Rain lashed in, stinging her face. The man stood waiting, water dripping from his hair, the storm rolling behind him like the growl of some great beast. His words came halting, thick with accent but clear enough. Storm bad. Shelter. One night. She should have refused. Every lesson screamed it. But behind him loomed 6 more, their eyes on her cabin, their horses restless. She was one woman with a single gun. To deny them was to invite the storm inside as well as out. Her throat constricted. She hesitated. And then she saw him. Among the 6 who waited astride their horses, one sat a little apart. His face was not as fierce as the others, though his body was built like stone. He watched her, not hungrily, not cruelly, but with a stillness that unsettled her more than any threat. His gaze did not slide off her like the townsfolk's did. It lingered, calm and unflinching, as though he were not looking at prey but at something he recognized. Clara's finger slackened on the trigger. Her breath caught. She nodded once, and pulled the door open wider. Then, without warning, the quiet one turned his head. His gaze met hers across the room, steady, unreadable. For a moment the storm's roar faded, the fire's crackle hushed, and all that remained was that look. It was not fierce, not demanding. It was a gaze that simply saw. Her breath shuddered out of her. She could not hold his eyes long. She looked down at her hands, clenched white around the shotgun stock. The storm bellowed again, shaking the cabin. Outside, the night swallowed the prairie whole. Inside, 7 warriors warmed themselves at her fire, while Clara Whitfield sat on the edge of a choice she could not yet name. And though she told herself she had allowed them in only for survival's sake, a part of her, buried deep, long starved of recognition, thrummed with a question that unsettled her more than any fear. Had someone finally, after all these years, looked at her and not looked away? At dawn, the storm had broken, leaving the world washed raw and shining. Clara stepped outside into air that smelled of wet earth and pine, her boots sinking in the softened ground. The horizon still carried bruises of storm clouds, but above her, light bled gold through ragged seams. She hugged her shawl close, more for comfort than cold, and glanced back at the cabin. Smoke rose thin and steady from the chimney, a sign that the strangers she had let inside had taken her hearth as their own through the night. She should have been afraid still. Every rule of frontier life whispered it was folly to trust 7 men she did not know, men the town would call enemies. But when she had risen before dawn to fetch water, she had found the woodpile neatly stacked higher than she left it, her kindling split finer than her axe could manage. Her fence, sagging from the winter, stood straight and secure. Work done in silence while she slept. Inside, the warriors were already awake, their movements measured, almost reverent. One tended the horses tethered under the trees, another mended a bridle with deft hands. Gray Fox, the leader, acknowledged her only with a nod before returning to his task of sharpening a blade. They needed no words to fill the morning, no wasted noise. But it was the quiet one, Tiasehina, that drew her eyes without her meaning to. He was bent over the hearth, coaxing the embers back into flame. The light painted his cheekbones, the lines of his face carved deep like the mesas of his homeland. When he lifted a kettle, his movements carried a gentleness at odds with his massive frame. She caught herself staring and turned quickly away, scolding her own foolishness. Clara busied herself with chores, though her hands would not still. She felt their presence with every step. She had lived so long in silence that the simple fact of being watched unsettled her. Yet no ridicule gleamed in their eyes, no sneer as she often endured in Ash Bend. Clara busied herself with chores, though her hands would not still. She felt their presence with every step. She had lived so long in silence that the simple fact of being watched unsettled her. Yet no ridicule gleamed in their eyes, no sneer as she often endured in Ash Bend. Their gaze was neither pitying nor dismissive, it was simply seeing. That unsettled her most of all. By midday, the storm had left the ground steaming, the sky sharpened to a cold blue. The men readied themselves to ride on, saddles tightened, gear packed with practiced speed. Relief should have come then, their leaving meant safety, a return to solitude where gossip could not reach her. But instead, a strange hollowness opened in her chest. Before mounting, Gray Fox approached her. His English was spare, each word dragged through careful thought. "We go. You, safe." His eyes flicked to the horizon, then back to her, a weight behind them she could not name. He gave a short bow, almost formal, then turned. The others followed, swinging into saddles with fluid ease. All except Tiesahina. He lingered by the hearth as though reluctant to leave, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the firelight one last time. Then, without warning, he crossed to her. In his hand was something small, rough-hewn. He held it out, palm open. A bird. Carved from wood, simple but careful, the wings stretched as if caught mid-flight. She stared, unable to speak. His eyes met hers, steady, unflinching, as they had the night before. Then he placed the bird gently into her hands and stepped back without a word. Before she could summon breath to thank him, he was outside, mounting his horse. And then they were gone, 7 shadows galloping across the wet plain until the horizon swallowed them whole. Clara stood with the bird cupped in her palm, her heart unsteady as if the storm still roared inside her. She told herself it was nothing more than courtesy, a token for her shelter. Yet some deeper part of her, long muted by years of silence, whispered otherwise. Days passed. The land dried, the sun burned hot again, and Ashben's whispers found her. A trader passing through glanced at her cabin and spat, "Savages seen at your door, Whitfield. Best watch yourself. Folks in town already talking." His eyes had carried judgment sharp as glass. By week's end, the talk reached a boil. A man rode out to her place, a neighbor she once called friend before distance and rumor built a wall between them. He dismounted stiffly, eyes hard. "Clara," he said, spitting her name like a curse, "the whole town knows. You let them in. You shared bread with them. What'll folks believe next? That you shared your bed?" Her face burned hot. She tried to speak, to explain the storm, the fear, the humanity of it, but the words tangled in her throat. He sneered, swung back into his saddle, and left her standing in the dust, shame clawing her insides raw. That night, alone by the fire, Clara turned the wooden bird over and over in her hands. Its wings stretched as though it might take flight, though its body was bound forever to the weight of wood. She pressed it against her chest, the carved edges biting her palm. For the first time in years, tears slid hot and unbidden down her cheeks. The next morning, hoofbeats thundered again. She froze, heart leaping. When she stepped outside, shielding her eyes against the sun, she saw them, 7 riders, cresting the rise, riding hard. Tiesahina at the front this time. They came not as shadows but as a wall of presence, and Clara knew before they reached her gate that something had shifted. She felt it in the steadiness of their gaze, in the way the ground itself seemed to bow beneath their approach. But Ashben had followed. A dust cloud rose from the opposite direction, townsmen, rifles slung, torches in hand though it was morning. Their voices carried on the wind, ugly, jeering. "There she is. Harlot. Savage's whore." Her stomach nodded. They had come to her door not for justice but for spectacle. She could almost hear the gossip already spreading like wildfire, Clara Whitfield, fallen, corrupted, damned. The townsmen reined up yards from her fence, spitting their venom. One, red-faced and sweating, pointed a rifle. "We'll have no Comanche keeping here. Drive M out or we'll burn you with M." Clara's knees weakened. The old shame surged, that heavy cloak she had worn for so many years, woven from rejection and gossip. Her mouth opened but no words came. She wanted to sink into the earth, vanish into the silence she had made her home. But then Tiesehina moved. He dismounted slowly, deliberately, every motion carved with dignity. He walked forward, placing himself between Clara and the rifles. He did not raise his weapon. He did not bare his teeth. He simply stood, tall and immovable, a living wall of quiet defiance. The men faltered. Their torches shook, their rifles wavered. Something in his silence, in his unflinching calm, struck deeper than any shouted threat. They shifted, muttered, spat into the dirt. And one by one, they turned their horses, retreating under the weight of a presence they could not name. Clara watched them go, her breath breaking loose in sobs she could no longer hold back. When she lifted her gaze, Tiesehina was watching her, not with triumph, not with pity, but with that same steady stillness that had undone her since the first night. She stepped forward, her hands trembling, the wooden bird clutched tight. Her voice, when it came, was ragged. "All my life," she whispered, "I thought no one would ever stand for me." He said nothing. Instead, he reached, lifting her hand with the carved bird still inside it, and covered it with his own. His palm was warm, solid, steady as the earth beneath them. No words passed. They did not need them. The morning light spilled across the plain, gilding the cabin, the fields, the broken fence made whole again. Clara stood in its glow, no longer invisible, no longer unseen. And in that silence, she understood, sometimes love does not come with declarations, nor hope with shouts. Sometimes it arrives on horseback in a storm, leaves a carved bird in your hand, and teaches you that dignity itself is a kind of vow. The world would keep gossiping. Ash Bend would keep spitting her name. But standing there with his hand over hers, she knew the noise no longer mattered. For the first time in years, Clara Whitfield did not feel alone. And for the first time, she wondered if the silence that had kept her prisoner might yet become the soil where something new, something steady and unbreakable, could take root.